Hannah Reyes is 34 years old, and she once catered her own mother's 65th birthday party, the party her 5-year-old daughter was banned from. Picture it, 94 guests under string lights in a
It is
converted
just so
orchard
wonderful
barn,
to see
her mother in
everyone.
pearl
Thank you for
earrings,
coming.
tapping a champagne glass with a spoon, a photographer arranging 2 rows of chairs in front of a cream backdrop, calling for immediate family only, and her mother turning to her, in front of the
I am
pastor,
so grateful
the
to see
garden
you all
club,
here today.
and her sister's
Thank you for
wealthy
coming.
future in-laws,
It really is
sweet
a
as
lovely
frosting.
evening.
You can
Yes, it
wait in the
certainly
kitchen,
is.
honey.
We need
This
to be
part
ready
is
by
just
8.
for family.
The main course is
Hannah
ready.
looked at her. She looked at that backdrop with no room in it for her daughter, and she untied her apron. What she said next made her mother, her father, and her sister go pale in front of every guest they had spent months trying to impress. 94 people went completely silent. But that moment only makes sense with 3 weeks of context first, starting with a folder Hannah was never supposed to see. 3 weeks before that party, Hannah was in her patisserie kitchen at 6 in the morning, piping 200 lemon tartlets for somebody else's wedding. Her daughter Sadie sat on a step stool beside her, dusting flour over everything within reach, and singing a song from preschool with most of the words wrong. She's 5, she sings loud, she runs everywhere, and she asks strangers about their dogs. Some people call that wild. Hannah calls it being alive. Hannah runs a small dessert studio in Elmswood, Ohio, called Maple and Salt. Cakes, grazing tables, and full dessert programs for weddings and events. She started it 9 years ago with a second-hand oven, a borrowed delivery van, and a dented tin recipe box that belonged to her grandmother, June. That box sits on a shelf above her prep station, the way other people keep a Bible. Nana June taught her to bake in the kitchen of the
There
little
you go.
apartment
Just give
building
it a
she owned
slow
on Larch
stir.
Street, back when Hannah was small enough to need a chair to reach the counter. June had bought that building in 1962, 4 brick units, 3 of them rented out, 1 of them hers, and she ran an informal little bake counter out of her own kitchen for decades. She used to say, "Feed people like you mean it, Hannah girl." Hannah has been a widow for 3 years. Her husband Eric died in a car accident on Route 9 when Sadie was 2, and she kept them afloat with that recipe box, a bank loan, and more sheet pans than sleep. They live in a small blue bungalow 12 minutes from her parents' house. It's not a big life, but it's hers, and she built it with her own 2 hands. Every dessert that leaves her kitchen has her grandmother somewhere in it. That morning, Sadie had just talked her mother into letting her pipe 1 cupcake badly, gloriously, when the phone rang against the flour bin. Her mother's name lit up the screen. "Hannah, sweetheart," Diane said, in the voice she saves for big asks. "I need you Saturday, family meeting, it's important." Saturday, her parents' dining room smelled like lemon polish and ambition. Her mother, Diane, had a white binder open on the table, the kind with printed tabs. Her sister, Paige, 37, sat beside her, reviewing paint chips like a judge reviewing evidence. Her father, Gerald, poured coffee and looked mostly at the window. "I'm turning 65 once," Diane announced, "and we are doing it properly." Properly meant Sycamore Barn, the event venue out past the county line. 90 guests, string lights, a 4-course menu built around Nana June's recipes, a full dessert program with June's caramel cake as centerpiece. Diane flipped the binder toward Hannah, tapped the dessert tab with 1 manicured nail, and smiled. "And of course, you'll do the dessert, sweetheart. That can be your gift." Not a question. A delivery notification. Hannah did the math in her head, the way other women count to 10, 90 covers, a full dessert bar, a tiered cake, staffed and styled. That's not a gift. That's a small car. But she'd been feeding this family for 9 years. Every Christmas, every Easter, every funeral. And the sentence "you'll do the desserts" had stopped surprising her sometime around year 4. So she said what she always said. "Send me the guest list." Paige slid a paint chip across the table without looking up. "The linens should be this ivory. Vivian hates bright white. Vivian Callahan is Paige's future mother-in-law, and Hannah will get to the Callahans. Believe her." Diane beamed at both of them like a general whose army had saluted. Then she turned to the last tab in the binder, labeled photography, and her smile did something Hannah didn't have a name for yet. It tightened at the corners, like a lid going on a jar. "Which brings me," she said, "to the delicate part. Gerald set down the coffee pot very quietly, the way a man does when he already knows what's coming. "We've hired a professional photography studio for the whole afternoon," Diane said. "Ashworth and Vale. The good one. Everything has to be perfect." She straightened the binder so its edge lined up with the table, which is why Sadie isn't coming. Hannah honestly thought she'd misheard. She asked her mother to say it again, and Diane did, slower, the way you talk to a caterer who's behind on canapes. "Sadie is not coming to the party, she's too wild, she'll ruin the photos." Just like that, her daughter, her only granddaughter on Hannah's side, banned from a family birthday party like a dog from a wedding. Paige studied her nails. Gerald looked at the tomato stakes in the yard. Nobody said a word in Sadie's defense, and the silence had a rehearsed quality, like they'd already held this vote without her. "She's 5, Hannah said. "She's a child, not a raccoon." Diane waved her hand as if swatting the point out of the air. "Don't make it a thing, Hannah. It's one afternoon. She won't even remember." Then she moved on to florals, because in Diane's world, a banned grandchild and a hydrangea order carry roughly equal weight. Hannah stood up. She picked up her jacket. Her hands were shaking, and she hated that they were shaking. "Then you'll need a different pastry chef," she said. "And her mother, she wants you to hear this part clearly." Her mother smiled, not an angry smile, a patient one. The smile of a woman who has already read the last page of the book you're just starting. "Sit down, honey," she said. "The contracts are already in your studio's name." Hannah stood there with her jacket half on, trying to understand the sentence. Contracts, plural, already, her name. Here's what her mother had done. 2 months earlier, Diane had booked Sycamore Barn, the rental company, and the florist, all under Maple and Salt, Hannah's business, using vendor accounts Diane had access to because Hannah had once let her order flowers through her florist discount for a church luncheon. "They gave us the vendor rate," Diane said, delighted with herself. Isn't that clever? Clever. If Hannah canceled now, the penalties landed on her studio, not her mother's. In a town the size of Elmswood, she'd also be the pastry chef who torched 3 local vendors 8 weeks before her biggest Saturday in June. Her reputation is her payroll. Diane knew that. She'd known it when she typed Hannah's business name into those booking forms. Hannah drove home with her knuckles white on the wheel, and by the time she pulled into her own driveway, she'd made the first decision, the one that mattered most. Sadie was done. Not done with the party, done standing in front of Diane to be graded, no begging Grandma to reconsider, no trotting her daughter out for inspection so she could earn a folding chair at the kids' table. Whatever Saturday turned out to be, Sadie was going to spend it somewhere she was celebrated. That question was closed. Everything else was still open. That night, Hannah called Sycamore Barn to confirm what she already feared. The coordinator was cheerful. "Yes, client of record, Maple and Salt. Yes." The deposit had gone through in April, on Hannah's business card, the one her mother had borrowed the number from. One thing kept snagging in her head, and it wasn't the money yet. A photography studio for the entire afternoon. A ban on one small girl. Since when did her mother care that much about photos? To explain what happened next, you have to understand the 9 years first. When Nana June got too tired to bake, the work passed to Hannah the way the recipe box did, quietly, all at once. She'd made desserts for her parents' anniversary dinners, Paige's college graduation party, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas Eve, every Easter, for a congregation's worth of cousins. When June died 6 years ago at 88, Hannah baked for 140 mourners with tears dripping off her chin and never sent anyone a bill. Family discount, her mother called it. The discount was 100%. Her husband Eric used to watch her load the van for another free family event and shake his head. "Your family thinks free is your love language," he said once. She laughed it off. He wasn't laughing. Here's the thing. She could afford the ingredients. What she couldn't afford, and didn't notice she was paying, was the arithmetic underneath it. That in her family's ledger, her time was worth nothing, her skill was worth nothing, and her presence was a service that came with the venue. Nana June never treated it that way. She'd sit in Hannah's kitchen those last years, wrapped in her cardigan, tasting batter off a wooden spoon, and say, "Feed people like you mean it, Hannah girl." She meant love. Diane heard catering. That night, after Sadie was asleep with her stuffed bear and one sneaker still on, Hannah sat at her desk with a glass of wine she didn't drink. In the drawer was every receipt, order sheet, and invoice from 9 years of family events, because she keeps records the way her mother keeps appearances. She did something she'd never once let herself do. She started adding it up. The number was $28,700. 21 events over 9 years, priced at market rate the same way she'd bill any stranger. Ingredients, staff, her time. She checked it twice, because she's the kind of woman who checks it twice, and the second pass came out the same to the dollar. Only once had she tried to invoice them, last spring, for her parents' 40th wedding anniversary. She'd mailed a bill for ingredients only, her labor free. Diane arrived at Sunday dinner with the envelope in her purse, and cried at the table. Actually cried, dabbing her eyes with a napkin Hannah had ironed. After the party for my 65th, she'd said, patting Hannah's hand. We'll settle everything up at once, I promise. Hannah still has the page. Her mother's words, in Hannah's handwriting, and beneath them, because Diane was performing generosity for the whole table, her mother's actual signature, looping and proud. Before she closed the drawer that night, an old photograph slid out from between 2 receipts. Christmas, 2 years ago, the whole family laughing in front of the tree. There she is, at the far edge of the frame, half cut off, holding a tray. She looked at that photo a long time. She'd been out of the picture for years. She just hadn't noticed. Now, the Callahans. 18 months ago, Paige got engaged to Nolan Callahan, and the family's entire solar system found a new son. The Callahans are old money, a Stonegate, a country club membership, opinions about ivory versus bright white. Paige quit her real estate job to plan the wedding. Diane joined Vivian Callahan's garden club within the season. Dinner conversations stopped being about anybody's actual life and became a long rehearsal for an audience of 2. Vivian and Edmund Callahan, who Diane liked to whisper, "Notice everything." 4 days after the family meeting, Paige swept into Hannah's studio with a leather folio and 6 menu changes. The lemon tarts were out. Vivian preferred a chocolate ganache. The macarons felt a little basic. She wanted a champagne and oyster bar, like the club does. Hannah wrote it all down like a good vendor, while her mixer hummed at her on Paige's behalf. Then Paige got to the real item on her agenda. Day of, could you dress, neutral? The Callahans notice everything. Hannah looked up from her notepad. I'll be in a white chef coat, Paige. Baking. Perfect, Paige said, relieved, as if Hannah had agreed to be wallpaper. Nolan came in behind her, carrying a crate of rented stemware, set it down where Hannah pointed, and stole a tartlet off the cooling rack. These are unbelievable, he said, and meant it. Hannah has never managed to dislike Nolan. He has the friendly, unexamined decency of a man who's never had to check a price tag or a motive. He sees nothing coming, ever. At the door, Paige turned with her hand on the frame, almost as an afterthought. Oh, Mom told you about Sadie, right? A beat. Good. It's honestly for the best. The bell over Hannah's door jingled, cheerful as ever, and she stood there holding a menu with no lemon tarts and a brand new question. For the best? Who's best? She made one last honest try before she started checking the windows. She called her mother that evening with a compromise so reasonable it embarrassed her to say out loud, Sadie comes for cake and 1 hour of party, and Hannah takes her home before photography starts. She wouldn't so much as touch a camera. Diane sighed the sigh of a woman beset by unreasonable daughters. The photographer says no children who can't sit still. It's his policy. Then, lowering her voice like they were sharing a confidence. And frankly, Hannah, after what she did to Nana June's music box, I'd think you'd want to keep her home. Hannah stopped stirring the pot in front of her. What she did to what? The music box. The hand-painted one, from the hutch, at the engagement brunch. Sandra, Vivian, sorry, saw the whole aftermath. I've never been so mortified. Here is what Hannah remembers about that brunch 14 months ago. She remembers Sadie at her elbow on the sun porch for most of it, coloring a paper placemat with 3 broken crayons. She remembers hearing something break inside the house, a bright, delicate crack, and the dining room going briefly quiet, and she remembers that by the time she came in, it was swept up, and nobody wanted to talk about it. Her mother had never once mentioned it since, until it was useful. She got off the phone and stood very still in her kitchen. Her daughter is loud. She is not destructive, and she was never near that hutch. Somebody had written Sadie into a story that wasn't true, told it to Diane, and let it harden into fact, which meant the ban wasn't a policy, it was a verdict. And Hannah was about to find out who wrote it. You can't interrogate a 5-year-old, and you shouldn't try. So the next morning, while Sadie painted the kitchen table, and occasionally the paper on it, Hannah went in sideways. Hey Bug, do you remember Nana's little music box? The one with the painted birds? Sadie didn't even look up from her brush. Aunt Paige said don't touch, so I colored. Colored where? On the porch with Miss Marge. We counted ladybugs. 14. She held up paint-covered fingers as evidence, which is more documentation than her grandmother ever asked for. Kids tell the truth in crumbs, you just have to pick them up. Miss Marge is Marge Ellery, 86, Nana June's closest friend for 60 years, and she had indeed been at that brunch, parked on the sun porch in her good cardigan. One witness at a time, that's how Hannah does everything. She called Aunt Ro first, her father's younger sister, 64, the only member of the family who says true things at regular volume. Ro remembered the brunch fine. She remembered the crash coming from the dining room while Sadie was out on the porch, and she remembered walking in to see Paige standing at the hutch holding a wad of paper towels. I didn't see it break, Ro said, careful as always, but I saw who cleaned it up in a hurry, and it wasn't a 5-year-old. Then Hannah called Marge Ellery and asked if she liked coffee cake, which in Elmswood is how you request testimony. Marge ate 2 slices, patted her mouth with a paper napkin, and told Hannah exactly what happened, in order, like a woman reading minutes into a record. She and Sadie had been on the sun porch the whole late morning, counting ladybugs in a jelly jar. Through the doorway, Marge had a clear view of the hutch. She saw Paige reach past it for her phone, catch the open door with her elbow, and knock June's music box to the floor. She saw Paige freeze, look around, and start sweeping porcelain into a napkin. Then she told your mother she'd handle it, Marge said. And the next day, your mother's telling the garden club that poor little Sadie flung herself into the hutch. She leaned forward, her voice going flinty. That child was on the porch with me, counting ladybugs. I told your mother so, to her face, that same week. She sat back. She didn't want it, so I'll tell you the truth. Of everything Hannah learned that month, this is the one that reorganized her the most. And not because of Paige. Paige broke something and lied. People do that. It's small and ugly and ordinary. What stopped Hannah cold was her mother. She'd been handed the truth by June's oldest friend, an eyewitness with no reason to lie, and she'd set it aside because the lie was more useful. The lie gave her a banned grandchild with a cause. A policy needs a reason. A verdict only needs a story. Driving home, Hannah kept circling one question, only now it had teeth. If the reason was manufactured, the ban was never about Sadie, so what was it about? She confronted Paige the way she'd want to be confronted, privately, calmly, facts in a row. She brought her a latte at the bridal boutique, waited for the seamstress to step out, and told her what Marge saw. Paige didn't gasp, didn't deny, didn't even set down her phone. She's 5, Hannah. She'll forget the whole thing by Christmas. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters, Hannah said. Paige finally put the phone face down. You have no idea how much is riding on this party. Vivian cares about family presentation. Her sister vets people, Hannah. She vetted the last fiancé right out the door. One chaotic kid in one photo, and suddenly we're that kind of family. She's not one chaotic kid, Hannah said. She's your niece. And you let a 5-year-old carry your broken dish for 14 months. Paige's jaw set, smooth as a showroom floor. The music box was an accident. The story just settled where it settled. I'm not relitigating it weeks before the most important weekend of my life. She checked a new gold watch. Anyway, after Saturday, none of this will matter. She said it lightly, the way you'd mention weather, but it caught on something as it went past. Not the wedding. The wedding was a year out, Everybody knew that. After Saturday, meaning the party, what exactly was Saturday going to settle? Meanwhile, Hannah did what a sensible woman does when she finds herself locked into contracts she never signed. She tried to unlock them. Her bank was sympathetic and useless in the way only banks can be. Removing her as guarantor required signatures from both parties, plus a 30-day window. The party was in 18 days. There was no faster path. So she went to see Priya Patel, her closest friend since 10th grade, and a paralegal at the only real law firm in Elmswood. Priya flipped through Hannah's folder, bookings, guarantor forms, Diane's handwritten IOU, and tapped the stack. "Keep every receipt," she said. "Paper doesn't cry." Then she pointed at one line on the venue's walkthrough schedule, faxed to Hannah that morning as client of record. Photography load-in, 1:00 p.m., legacy set plus backdrop. "What's a legacy set?" Priya asked. Hannah said she didn't know. She said it while something cold walked down the back of her neck, because whatever it was, nobody had mentioned it to the woman paying for the room it would stand in. That Sunday, her father showed up at her bungalow unannounced, the way he does, with a toolbox he didn't need and a flat of tomato seedlings he did. Her kitchen faucet had a drip only he could hear. While he took the fixture apart, Sadie supervised from the counter, handing him washers with surgical importance, and then the two of them went out back to plant the seedlings in the bed Eric had built the spring before he died. Hannah's father is 68, a retired mechanic with hands like tree bark, and he taught her daughter to whistle that afternoon. Badly, but she got one clean note out and looked at him like he'd handed her the moon. He came in for lemonade and stood at her sink, not quite looking at her. "Your mother," he started, and stopped. He turned a washer over in his fingers like a coin. "The party's bigger than a birthday, Hannah. There's things." He caught himself, the way a man steps back from a ledge he walked to on purpose. Whatever it was folded itself back up inside him. Just make the desserts the way Nana June did. The whole thing goes easier if the cake's right. He rinsed his glass, patted Sadie's head, and left Hannah standing in a kitchen that no longer had a drip, but had developed a much bigger leak. Her father knew something. He'd carried it to her house along with the seedlings, gotten it as far as the sink, and taken it home again. Now Hannah has to back up 14 months, because you need to know about the $19,500. It started with a phone call from her mother, crying, real crying, the kind that scared her. Her father's knee. The orthopedic surgeon wanted to do a full replacement. There was a date on the calendar at St. Bernard's, there were forms, and there was a gap insurance wouldn't cover. On top of that, the furnace at her parents' house had started failing, and winter was coming. $19,500 would cover both. Hannah wants this part on the record. She did not just write a check. A widow with a small business does not have $19,500 of sentiment lying around. She asked for the paperwork, and they gave it to her, without a flicker. A real orthopedic consult with a real scheduling letter, Gerald Reyes, procedure date set, and a real HVAC estimate from a real local company. She read every page, transferred the money, typed the word loan in the memo line, and her mother squeezed her hand and called her a rock. 3 weeks later, the procedure was postponed. The doctor wanted to try physical therapy first. Watch and wait. The furnace could go another season. Why waste the warm weather? Hannah asked follow-up questions. She got smooth answers with medical words in them. Then a wedding season buried her, and grief is a fog, and life moved on the way it does. It wasn't until she was assembling her folder at midnight that she laid the scheduling letter next to her bank statement and finally saw what 14 months of trust had kept her from seeing. The procedure at St. Bernard's had been canceled, not postponed. She confirmed it later, 2 days after her money landed in the account. 2 days. Postponed her foot. Somewhere, her $19,500 had gotten up from the table, put on its coat, and walked off to do something else entirely. While Hannah was quietly excavating the past, the present kept sending invoices. The guest list went from 90 to 94. The champagne bar became a champagne and oyster bar. Diane took to approving desserts over video call, holding her phone so close to each tray that Hannah mostly baked for her mother's left eyeglass lens. 17 days out, Hannah finally said a number out loud. "Mom, this dessert program is $9,800 at cost, before staff." A pause. Then her mother laughed. light as meringue, and delivered the sentence Hannah wanted engraved somewhere. "You're the pastry chef, honey, not the guest of honor. Caterers manage." Hannah looked out her studio window at the van with her grandmother's recipe painted on the side, maple and salt, made with love since, and heard herself answer in a voice so even it surprised her. "Yes, we do." Her mother took it as agreement, and moved on to whether the napkins should be sage or cream. It wasn't agreement. It was the sound a lock makes when it decides. That afternoon, the venue coordinator called to confirm the final tasting and mentioned, in passing, that the photography studio would drop off its folder for the run of show. "Your client of record," she said breezily. "It'll all come to you." It arrived on a Wednesday, wedged between a linen invoice and a table diagram, a manila folder stamped with the logo of Ashworth and Vale Photography that Hannah was never supposed to open, but her studio's name was on the delivery, and she is the client of record. So she opened it at her prep counter with flowers still on her hands. On top was the run of show. Under it, a single laminated page, Reyes Family Legacy Session, booked by P. Reyes, 14 numbered frames, golden hour portraits, a framed heirloom print, 24 by 36, for above the mantel. Hannah read the list twice. 14 photographs of her family. Her daughter wasn't in a single frame. Neither was she. Not the group shot, not the generations shot, not one. And at the bottom, in the photographer's penciled shorthand, 4 small marks that rearranged her entire month, per page. No H+S, no Hannah, no Sadie. She set the page down next to 200 cooling tartlets and understood everything at once, the way you understand a joke instantly in the body before you can explain it. She's too wild. She'll ruin the photos. There were never going to be photos of Sadie. There were never going to be photos of her either. The ban wasn't a policy or even a verdict. It was a crop. Somebody had redesigned the family for the camera, and Hannah's entire branch had been cut out of the tree in writing, with initials, like a change order. She didn't scream or call her mother or post anything anywhere. She photocopied every page, returned the originals exactly where they'd been left, and called Aunt Ro. "Is Saturday about Mom's birthday?" A long pause. When Ro finally answered, her voice had lowered into the register she saves for funerals and true things. "That party isn't about her birthday, sweetheart. Come by after church. Some of it isn't mine to tell over a phone." That night, Hannah stood a long time in the doorway of Sadie's room. 5 years old, too wild for a photograph, according to people who had never once watched her fall asleep holding a jelly jar with a ladybug in it, because Miss Marge said ladybugs are good luck, and Sadie wanted the luck to be there when she woke up. She wasn't going to scream on a lawn. She was going to do this the way she does everything, the way 9 years of thankless kitchens had trained her to do it. They had taught her to manage. They were about to find out what a pastry chef manages. Aunt Ro's kitchen smells like percolator coffee, and nothing false survives 10 minutes in it. Hannah got one bite of coffee cake down before Ro laid an envelope on the table, a heavy cream card, engraved. New member reception. The Elmswood Golf and Country Club is pleased to welcome Gerald and Diane Reyes. Sponsored by Edmund Callahan. Initiation fee at that club is $16,000, Ro said, arms folded. "I know because your mother told me, couldn't help herself, told me the same spring she sat in this kitchen and cried poor about your daddy's knee." Hannah did the arithmetic out loud, quietly, the way you'd read a verdict. 16,000 for the club, 3,500 for a legacy photography deposit paid in February by check, $19,500 to the dollar, the exact size of a knee replacement and a furnace that never happened. Her money hadn't disappeared. It had been repurposed into a club membership sponsored by Edmund Callahan, into 14 frames she wasn't in, into the staging of a family whose picture improved once she was out of it. "Who signed the checks, Ro?" Hannah asked. "Her aunt didn't dress it up. Whose handwriting do you think pays for things in that house, honey? Your mother hasn't written a check since your father's last promotion." Gerald Reyes. Her steady, quiet, tomato-growing father who 2 nights ago had stood in her kitchen and asked her to hold it till after. Not a bystander to the fog, the bookkeeper of it. 6 days to Saturday, Hannah went to see him alone, the morning her mother gets her hair set. He was in the garden, staking tomatoes. She didn't bring documents or accusations. She brought the country club card and set it on the picnic table between them, the way you'd set down a found wallet. He looked at it, sat down slow, like his knees had aged 10 years on the way down, and took off his cap. For the first time in her adult life, her father talked to her about money. Nobody plans to be old and poor, Hannah. The shop pension's been thin for years. Your mother looked at that club, at the Callahans, at Paige marrying up, and she saw a lifeboat for both of us. Somewhere we'd matter, people who'd look after us when I stop. He turned the card over. And I looked at you. You're the one who always stays afloat. Eric passes, and 6 months later, you're baking for the Hensley wedding with the baby on your hip. Some people you stop worrying about them. It ain't fair, I know it ain't. There it was. The closest thing to the truth she'd ever get from him, and so much worse than a lie, and so human she had to look at the tomatoes for a second. They hadn't robbed her out of contempt. They'd robbed her out of confidence. You looked at me and saw a bank, Dad, she said gently, which was somehow the hardest way to say it. He didn't argue. She kissed the top of his head, took the card back, and drove to work. Priya, meanwhile, had found the last piece. One more thing, she said, turning her laptop around. Before you finalize any plans, you should see what got filed at the county recorder's office. On the screen, the county auditor's parcel page, public record. 4 units, brick, Larch Street. Current owners, Gerald and Diane Reyes. Beside it, Priya's sticky note, because in a county this size, the title office books its notary slots through half the law firms in town, and schedulers talk. Quitclaim deed, grantee, Paige E. Reyes. Nana June's building. The kitchen where Hannah learned to bake standing on a chair. The one place on earth where she was never once out of frame. Her parents had inherited it when June died, and now it was sliding quietly to her sister. Notary appointment already on the books. Monday, June 15th, 9 a.m. 2 days after the party. Hannah sat very still and let the pieces click, one after another, like place settings going down. Saturday, a golden hour legacy session, a wall-sized family portrait, a barn full of witnesses watching the Reyes family glow. Attendance carefully edited. The Callahans reassured. The engagement cemented. Monday, 9 a.m., before the flowers even wilted. The building signed over. The future notarized. The whole arrangement sealed. After Saturday, none of this will matter. That's what Paige had told her at the boutique. She thought Saturday was their finish line. She had no idea Hannah was the one holding every contract they'd be celebrating under. The building was her parents' to give. That's the law. And Hannah never planned to fight it. What she could decide was whether they'd sign it in a fog of lies or in daylight, in front of every witness they'd invited to watch them shine. Thursday was the final tasting, and the Callahans came. Vivian in linen the color of expensive sand, Edmund with a handshake like a bank vault door. Hannah had set a long table with 6 courses in miniature, June's caramel cake, her shortbread, a champagne mousse Vivian had requested, sliced thin as hymnal pages. Her mother swept in wearing hosting perfume, kissed the air near Vivian's cheek, and began conducting introductions like an orchestra, the coordinator, the florist, and then Hannah in her chef coat, holding a tray. "And this is Hannah," her mother said, with a gracious little wave. "Our pastry chef, she does all our little events." Our pastry chef. Vivian looked from Diane's face to Hannah's, which share a chin. "Oh," she said. "Aren't you the sister?" One beat of silence. "She's the food person," Diane said smoothly, touching Vivian's elbow. "Paige, show Vivian the orchard row before the light goes." Hannah refilled water glasses with a steady hand and let the room believe what it liked. It didn't wound her the way it would have a month before, and that's how she knew she was changed. You can't insult the help when the help holds the deed to the evening. Friday night, 8 days out, Hannah finished building the folder. Here's exactly what went into it, because the contents are the whole strategy. 1. The ledger. 21 family events across 9 years, dated, itemized, market rate, totaling $28,700, with her mother's signed handwritten promise clipped to the front. 2. This party's own invoice, $9,800 at cost, every add-on documented. 3. The photocopied shot list, Reyes Family Legacy Session, booked by P. Reyes, 14 frames, and the penciled note she'd stopped needing to reread. 4. The St. Bernard scheduling letter, beside her bank statement. $19,500 out. Procedure canceled 2 days later. 5. The auditor's parcel printout for Larch Street, clipped to a note of the notary appointment half the county already knew about. 3 copies, tabbed like a closing packet, because if her family was going to treat her like a vendor, they were going to get vendor-grade paperwork. Then she wrote a single page in plain language, no speeches, no adjectives, just the order she'd read things in, timed at under 5 minutes. At the office supply store that afternoon, she'd bought a custom rubber stamp, red ink, paid in full. Not a weapon, a receipt. When headlights swept her kitchen window that night, her father was at the door with a box of tomatoes, canvas jacket, the air of a man who'd been sent and also come on his own, both at once, which was Gerald Reyes in one sentence. He talked about the seedlings first, then he got to it, or as close as he ever gets. Saturday, he said, turning his cap in his hands. Whatever you're feeling about your mother, and I know there's a list, hold it till after. We need this to go well, Hannah, more than you know. Hannah looked at this man who'd taught her daughter to whistle, who'd fixed her faucet without being asked, who had stood silent at every table where his wife rewrote the record. She gave him one door, wide open. Dad, did you know Sadie's not in a single photograph tomorrow? The cap went still in his hands. He looked at the tomatoes for a long, long moment, red, ripe, brought as tribute or apology or camouflage, she'll never know which. Then he put the cap on and said, "Good night, kiddo," and walked back out into the dark. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. A silence that careful is its own kind of answer. It takes practice. That was the night Hannah stopped hoping somebody in that house would choose them. It simplified things, the way a hard frost simplifies a garden. Saturday. Sycamore Barn filled up like a church on Easter. 94 guests, Pastor Reeves from First Community, the whole garden club in florals, June's old bridge circle, wobbly and bright-eyed, led by Marge Ellery with her cane and her good brooch. The Callahan table sat center right, Vivian, Edmund, Nolan, Silver cousins, under string lights. People found Hannah at the dessert table all evening, the way they'd report a miracle. Marge gripped her wrist with a small, strong hand. "June's caramel cake," she said. 60 years I've been trying to get that recipe out of somebody." Then she peered past Hannah toward the barn doors, and her face did what faces do when a count comes up short. "Where's our Sadie bug?" Sadie was at Aunt Rose having her own party. Marge studied Hannah a second too long. She'd heard something, then. The bridge circle had all heard something. Hannah watched the question move from table to table like a draft nobody could find the source of. No Sadie at a family party. Diane, meanwhile, was luminous. Floating between tables in dusty blue, laughing at Edmund's golf stories, one eye always on the photographer, who was quietly building his set by the stone fireplace. Umbrella lights, 2 rows of chairs, a cream backdrop. At 4:55, an assistant started aligning the chairs with a tape measure. A tape measure. Hannah dried her hands on her apron, touched the folder bag under the service table once, and heard a spoon begin to ring against crystal. Her mother stood at the head of the room, champagne raised, pearls catching the light, and gave a toast Hannah would bet money had been rehearsed in a bathroom mirror since April. She thanked everyone for 65 wonderful years. She thanked Pastor Reeves, the garden club, and the Callahans, a small bow of the head, for welcoming our page into such a wonderful family. Legacy, blessings, roots and branches. She did not mention the branch she'd had removed, or the 5-year-old, at this moment, having her own party across town, or the pastry chef standing by the service line in whites, which is to say, she did not mention the 2 people who had actually paid for the evening. Applause. Then the photographer folded his hands like a funeral director and announced family portraits by the fireplace, while the light held. "Immediate family only, please." Chairs were found, Diane center, Gerald at her shoulder, Paige and Nolan flanking, Nolan's little nieces imported for the front row, where a granddaughter might otherwise go. Diane looked around the barn, found Hannah by the service line, and, as 94 guests watched, as her pastor watched, as Vivian Callahan watched, raised her voice into that bright hostess register that carries to every corner, and delivered the line she'd been saving all her daughter's life. "You can wait in the kitchen, honey. This part is just for family." The barn went quiet. Marge Ellery set down her glass. Hannah looked at her mother. She looked at the backdrop with no room in it for her daughter, and she untied her apron. She folded it over her arm and didn't raise her voice, because she'd learned something in 9 years of working rooms. The quietest person with the best information owns the floor. "Actually, Mom, the kitchen can wait. I'd like to give you your birthday present in front of everyone. It's the same thing I've been giving this family for 9 years. The bill says it better than I can." A ripple went through the barn. Half laugh, half inhale. The sound a crowd makes when it can't tell yet whether something is charming or about to be historic. "Hannah, sweetheart," Diane said through a smile that had stopped reaching anything. "Not now." "It's on the program, Mom." Hannah held up the amended run of show, a word from the pastry chef, right after the toast. The coordinator, standing by the doors, nodded once. "That's the program." Hannah walked to the middle of the floor, between the fireplace and the head table, where the umbrella lights made a soft white circle on the boards. Fitting, since everyone had gone to such expense over the lighting. She set her folder bag on a chair and took out 3 tabbed copies. 94 faces. The Garden Club, forks down. Pastor Reeves, very still. Marge Ellery, leaning forward on her cane like a woman at a horse race. Vivian Callahan, chin tipped, recalculating in real time. Her father, hands flat on the tablecloth, looking at them. Her mother, center of her backdrop, exactly where she'd always wanted to be, in front of witnesses. She'd spent months gathering this audience for a portrait. Hannah hadn't gathered anyone, she was just borrowing them. 3 weeks ago, she began, my mother handed me my assignment for tonight. "So let's start with what tonight costs." She read from the first folder. No tremble, no flourish, just totals. Tonight's dessert program, 94 guests, a champagne bar, a tiered cake, $9,800 at cost. Every recipe tonight is my grandmother June's, from the tin box on that table. You've been eating her caramel cake. I made it as a birthday gift, which makes it the 22nd event I've catered for my family for free. She turned the page. 21 events, 9 years, every holiday, every funeral, at the same market rate I'd charge anyone in this room. $28,700. Never billed, except once. She lifted the sheet with Diane's looping signature, held it steady in the light. When my mother promised, in writing at her anniversary dinner, that we'd settle up after her 65th, which is tonight. The room had gone so quiet Hannah could hear the ice settle in the champagne bar. "So Mom, happy birthday, here's the settlement." She took out the last sheet, the full 9-year ledger, stamped in red, paid in full, and crossed the floor to lay it on the gift table, on top of the wrapped punch bowl. "Consider it my last gift from the pastry chef." Somebody in the back whispered, 28,000 to a deaf husband, loudly, the way small towns take minutes. Paige came up out of her chair, wine glass in hand, hissing Hannah's name. "This is not the time." "You're right," Hannah said, level. "The time was February when you booked a photographer." She opened the second folder. "This is the run of show for tonight's photography. It's called the Reyes Family Legacy Session, booked in February by P. Reyes. 14 frames ending in a portrait for above the mantel." She read the frames aloud, slowly, because lists don't editorialize. Frame 1, Diane and Gerald, porch swing. Frame 3, Diane, Gerald, Paige, and Nolan, orchard row. Frame 6, 3 generations, Diane, Paige, and Nolan's nieces. She looked up. "My daughter Sadie is in none of the 14, neither am I." And at the bottom, in the photographer's handwriting, per page, no H plus S, no Hannah, no Sadie. She turned to the photographer, a decent man holding a light meter like a shield. "Is that your shot list?" He glanced at Paige, at Diane, and did the only thing a professional can do. "That's the booking," ordered. "Yes, ma'am." Ordered. The barn passed the word around. 3 weeks ago, Hannah said, still level, "My daughter was banned from this party. I was told she's too wild, she'll ruin the photos." There were never going to be photos of her. Wild had nothing to do with it. A 5-year-old was cut from this family in pencil, and the story about the music box was the cover. From the bridge circle came the sound of a cane striking barn floor. Marge Ellery rose, all 5 feet of her, brooch blazing. "And she never touched that music box," Marge announced in the voice that has closed church rummage sales for 40 years. "That child was on the porch with me, counting ladybugs. When it broke, I told Diane so that very week. I'll say it louder now." 94 heads turned from Marge to Paige. Vivian Callahan turned to Paige very, very slowly, the way tide goes out. "Which brings us," Hannah said, "to the money." She set the third folder's contents on the head table, piece by piece, facing out, like a place setting. 14 months ago, I loaned my parents $19,500 for a knee replacement at St. Bernard's, and a new furnace. Here's the scheduling letter I was shown. Here's my transfer, memo line, loan. And here's the procedure. Canceled 2 days after my money arrived. Not postponed, canceled. She laid the last 2 items side by side. Here's the photography studio's balance sheet, which came to me as client of record. A $3,500 deposit, received in February, from the Reyeses on Larch Street. And here's the announcement card for the Elmswood Golf and Country Club. New members, Gerald and Diane Reyes, sponsored by Edmund Callahan. Initiation, $16,000. She looked up and did the arithmetic for the room, though half the garden club was already doing it on their napkins. 16 and 3,500 is 19,500. I thought I was paying for my father's knee. I paid for this backdrop, and for the club where tonight's guest list got recruited. Nobody moved. Edmund Callahan stood, unhurried, buttoning his jacket like a man closing a meeting, and bent to Vivian. His voice was quiet, but the room heard it. "We'll call the Reyeses Monday." Diane broke, not into apology, both hands pressed to her pearls, voice climbing to the rafters. "After everything this family has sacrificed for you," she cried, turning to her pastor, to the leaving Callahans, to anyone still buying it, "I am 65 years old, and she comes here with folders, accusing me." She chose the paperwork, wronged at last, by a filing system. Hannah let her run, the strangest mercy of the night, and the most useful. Every second Diane spent performing, the room got a longer look at her. While her mother performed, Hannah turned to the person she actually needed, sitting motionless at the head table, hands flat on the cloth, in the sport coat Diane had picked for him. Her father, who'd brought her tomatoes at 10 o'clock at night, and asked her to hold it till after. "Dad," she asked quietly, "in a room that size, quiet is the loudest register there is. Did you know Sadie wasn't in a single frame?" Her father looked at his hands, mechanic's hands scrubbed for the party, hands that had signed every check in that house since before she was born. The silence went on so long that behind her the umbrella light buzzed. Then he raised his head and looked at her, not at Diane, not at the pastor, at her. "We needed this to go well, Hannah." That was all, no denial. The one sentence a careful man permits himself, and it answered everything. Diane went pale in her way, theatrically, swaying, reaching for a chair back. Paige went pale in hers, furious, cornered, doing engagement math. But Gerald went pale like an honest man finally caught in the one lie of his life, gray and quiet all at once. And that was the one that cost Hannah. She nodded at him once, the way you close a ledger. "Now I know," she said, and turned back to the room, 1 page left, intending to be done by dessert. Diane found her second wind and aimed it at Hannah personally. "You've always resented your sister, always. You couldn't stand that Paige made something of herself. And ever since Eric died, you've been bitter, Hannah. Bitter and hard. This is grief talking. She needs help, everyone." Pastor Reeves rose from his chair. He didn't speak. He simply came and stood beside Diane and put one hand on her shoulder. It landed like a verdict. "That's enough." The garden club studied their centerpieces. 2 of June's bridge circle were openly holding hands. Hannah stood in the umbrella light and didn't take the bait, because the bait was the point. One flash of temper, and the story becomes hysterical, daughter ruins birthday. She gave her mother the calmest sentence she had, and meant every word. "No, Mom." I'm doing this because you taught me to keep good books. I'm just reading them out loud. At the Callahan table, Nolan hadn't moved with his family. He was looking at Paige the way a man looks at a house after the inspection comes back bad. Then he took the boutonniere from his lapel, set it on the tablecloth, said something to her too low to hear, and walked to the door to hold it for his mother. Paige stood absolutely still in her ivory dress, in front of her cream backdrop, perfectly lit, unphotographed. Nobody was pointing a camera at the Reyes family legacy now. Everyone was just looking at it. Hannah picked her apron up off the chair and spoke to the room one last time. Warm, clear, done. Please, everyone, stay. Enjoy the food. It's Nana June's. Every recipe out of the tin box on that table. She fed people like she meant it. That part of this family is still free. Then she turned to her parents and lowered her voice to just them. Though just them now included 94 witnesses, which was the entire point. Monday at 9, you'll sign whatever you sign. The building is yours to give. I looked it up. It's legal, and I won't be contesting anything. But hear me on this part. She looked at her mother. Sadie and I are not props you can crop out when the picture's too crowded, and paste back in when it needs warmth. As of tonight, Maple and Salt's family account is closed. Permanently. You want a pastry chef? Hire one. You want a daughter? That ship sails Monday at 9, and you know exactly what it would cost to hold it. One phone call, one canceled appointment, one truth told to that girl's face. Diane stared at her, mascara mapped across her powder, and said nothing. Her nothing was its own signature. Hannah took her house key off her ring, the spare she'd given her father years ago, and set it on the tablecloth in front of him, next to his coffee cup. Sundays are done, Dad. She asks about you. I'll tell her you love her, because that's true. It's just not enough. Last, she lifted Nana June's recipe box off the display table and tucked it under her arm. This comes home with us. She folded her apron square, laid it beside the stamped ledger on the gift table, apron and invoice, the uniform and the bill, everything she'd ever given them in one still life, and walked toward the barn doors. She didn't hurry, and she didn't look back. Her heels on the plank floor were the only sound in the building. Then, behind her, wood scraped. A cane found the floor. Marge Ellery was up, brooch first, chin high, coming after her at her own unbudgeable pace. One by one, June's whole bridge circle rose and gathered their good purses. They didn't storm out. Women that age don't storm, they departed. Which is worse? Each one paused at the door to thank Hannah, loudly, formally, the way you'd thank a hostess. Wonderful evening, June's cake was perfect. You tell that Sadie-bug Miss Marge has a jar for her. 2 garden club tables rose, apologetic and unstoppable. By the time the cake was cut, Hannah wasn't there to see it. The barn was a third empty. The photographer quietly broke down his umbrella lights without being asked. At some point, her mother stood alone in front of the cream backdrop, in the emptying room she'd curated for 4 months, 65 years old, perfectly lit, with nobody left she needed to impress, and nobody at all in the frame beside her. The next morning was the exact opposite, and it's the only part of that weekend Hannah keeps framed. 6 5-year-olds, 1 sprinkler, unlimited mud in her backyard. Aunt Ro brought 2 gallons of ice cream, and Marge Ellery arrived with a jelly jar, because a promise about ladybugs is still a promise. Sadie wore her swimsuit and a paper crown and ran the whole thing like a tiny, wet mare. Hot dogs for lunch, 0 vegetables, as contractually agreed. Too wild for their photos. Exactly wild enough for a real childhood. The only picture Hannah took all weekend hangs over her desk now. Sadie mid-leap through the sprinkler, airborne, shrieking with joy, completely blurred. Best photograph in the family. Monday at 9, the deed got signed anyway. The building went to Paige. Then, over the following month, the rest arrived on its own schedule, the way consequences do when you don't chase them. The engagement was postponed indefinitely. Rose phrasing, over coffee cake, one eyebrow doing the editorializing. The country club, Hannah's told, tabled her parents' membership pending sponsor review, which is club language for the Callahans taking their name off the lifeboat. 3 weeks after that, a listing appeared online. 4-unit building, Larch Street, price to move. Paige, saddled with wedding deposits and no wedding, was selling Nana June's building to cover the bills for a legacy that never made it to Labor Day. The building where Hannah learned to feed people like she meant it, sold by the one member of the family who never once turned on its stove. She let herself grieve that for exactly one evening. Then an envelope came in her father's handwriting. No letter, just a check for $19,500, and on a torn half-sheet of paper, in pencil, "It was yours. I'm sorry I knew." Aunt Ro told her later he'd sold the old truck he'd been restoring since before Hannah was born. Hannah deposited it into Sadie's college fund the same afternoon, and didn't call. He didn't either. Some accounts you settle, some you just stop carrying. Maple and Salt booked solid through the fall within a month. Half of it strangers, half of it guests from that night. 94 witnesses make excellent word of mouth. Diane's voicemails came weekly for a while, then monthly, then stopped. Hannah never blocked her number. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks that finally work. In December, a card arrived addressed to both of them, Hannah and Sadie, in her mother's careful hand. Christmas Eve, just us. No cameras. She's read it a dozen times. She hasn't answered it yet. It's on the refrigerator, under a magnet Sadie made. That's the most honest ending there is. Because here's what Hannah knows now. People who love you make room for you in the picture, and a child who's too wild for somebody's photograph is usually the only real thing in the room.